All right, everybody, we're back with a midweek show of the round, the Around the Draft podcast with ATB. Just Felix joined me today. Unfortunately, it's been a rough week for pretty much everybody. It feels like I can
Yeah.
speak on that. I think I can confidently say most people involved with, especially with this show, have had a bit of a rough week. So I'm just glad we could both at least be on. We'll be back Sunday as well to continue our normal shows on Sunday. But for now, we're gonna try to get in our episode. It's supposed to be last Sunday. I also want to shout out Dalton for helping me do a mock draft earlier this week too. So at least we got some stuff out earlier than the week too. But today is going to be top 5 running backs and top 5 tight ends. Going to kind of mix those two together. Not the strongest position groups in this class for sure. So we wanted to kind of put these together, do our top 5s. There's going to be guys outside the top 5, of course, that probably make an impact. But with the depth of the other positions, we'll kind of save the other shows for the focuses on like receiver, tackle, stuff like that. But before we get into that, Felix, I wanted to talk about this a little bit because we didn't really get to do a combine-focused show or anything like that. Any specific takeaways from the combine? I know a lot of the testing is kind of overblown and like how much it matters to where guys are going to go, but anything that you wanted to kind of touch on, whether it's for the Giants specifically, if you've been a Giants fan, or just kind of across the board.
Well, I guess talking from like a Giants perspective, I was very much not surprised that apparently at the combine they met with all the top quarterback prospects,
Right.
which as they should.
Yeah, as they should. Yeah.
Yeah, they definitely should. And I actually read today that apparently yesterday they had Drake May in for
I
top
did
30
see that
visit.
too. Yeah, I saw that too.
So, yeah, there's all those rumors about Jaden Daniels being maybe a
QB2.
lock for number 2,
Yeah.
and Patriots maybe not being fond of May at 3, so maybe they trade, and I don't know, but I think definitively the Giants are really big on Drake May, and I wouldn't be surprised if they make a play for him if he's there at 3 and the Pats don't want him or whatever it may be. Then again, the Pats might fall in love with JJ McCarthy. I mean, he did really well at the combine, although like you said, it's the underwear Olympics. So these guys are going to look either very, very physically imposing, like a lot of them were, or some of them are going to, not perform as well as expected, but still, these are basically world-class athletes getting into the pros. But to highlight a few players, I was very like not impressed because I think I like them as players, and we'll definitely get to talk about them in one of our coming episodes. But Ladd McConkey and Ricky Pearsall, I think, were two that stuck out to me because they were not just faster than I anticipated, like in the 40, but they
Right.
just handled everything so fluidly, all of the drills and everything. They looked so clean, catching the ball very well. So they in particular stuck out to me. Max Melton was one, of course, did
Yeah.
well in the
Rutgers
40, but
cornerback was really good.
yeah, physically, I think just not just, performed well, but showed up to the combine, I think, looking the part as well.
Yeah.
He looked like a solid boundary corner that's going to be able to handle the physicality of like even bigger receivers. And then the one guy that I was like, I think kind of made my jaw drop was Joe Alt. I mean, the fact that
Yeah.
he measured out at wasn't it like nearly 6'9" or something like
Almost
that?
6'9", 6'8" plus. He was definitely in the plus territory of 6'8",
Yeah,
320.
yeah,
Tested out of this world. Yeah, he kind of solidified tackle one, I imagine, at this point. I don't think there's much conversation about that.
yeah. I feel like he has the resume to go with it as well. In terms of the accolades, the tape, everything. But I was blown away at how someone that long to be nearly 6'9" moves as smoothly as he
Yeah.
does. You know what I mean? And is that tremendous of an athlete? That was the thing that got me, and those
Yeah.
guys are far and few in between.
The only guy that I can think of off the top of my head that's near his size, and I think he measured in a little shorter, was Colton Miller, Raiders off like left tackle. He's about 6'7", 6'8", I believe. And it's
Yeah,
hard for guys at that height to play with leverage. That's kind of the key thing. is
Yeah.
I saw there was actually some stuff going on Twitter about like, is Joe Alt being that tall actually good or bad? And it's like it's neither technically. It's more of just like
Mhm.
the fact that he can be that long and that tall and play with good pad level. Like you see him on tape, like he has great bend in his back. Like he's able to stay low enough to not let guys get into his chest and run him
Yeah.
back. It's not an issue at all on his film. If it was, then and he measured it that height, I'd be like, okay, maybe that's something you don't want to see. But the fact that it wasn't, it just makes it that more interesting that he's as high of a prospect he's going to be taken. So
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think of anybody else that like really stuck out. The guys I mentioned were the ones that I was really
I
like,
mean,
all right,
Mims
good job.
measured
But
in pretty
oh
ridiculously
yeah,
too. I mean, he
yeah,
didn't even
no,
get
he
to
was
do much
insane.
because of his thigh injury. Same thing with like Olu, who he measured in pretty good too. But like all the tackles who were able to fully test, like it felt like all of them like did pretty well, or like as well as you'd hoped they would do. Like,
Yeah.
I have to mention of, I think it's Fatanu is how said he should like how you should
Oh.
say it, I think. Him
Mhm.
measuring in at 34 plus inch arms is huge for him because now that threshold being met tells me, okay, his tape at left tackle that I thought was really, really good might mean that he can actually do that at the next level. I was always kind of viewing him as a potential guard, but
Yeah.
like, and not saying he couldn't do that or he shouldn't do that, but his fluidity at tackle, if it's going to work with his arm length, if it's not going to be an issue,
Yeah.
that means a lot because now not only could he go higher than I thought he was going to go, he might be going that high as a tackle and not just
Yeah.
as an interior player. So huge day for him too. He tested super well. A guy I want to mention too, and I kind of threw his name out there when I did my Steelers podcast I do on Wednesdays yesterday, as a potential like later round tackle that could be really good because he also measured in about where you want him to be. His teammate Rosengarten, the right tackle
Oh
for
yeah.
Washington,
Mhm.
he has really solid tape too. And his like I was worried he might also measure in a little bit small, lengthwise and size wise, but I think everything kind of checked out for me where like if he is there in like the third, fourth round and you need a guy that can play right tackle, he might be able to play pretty quickly and like at least be someone who can make an impact for you. So definitely curious to see how the tackles shake out. I think them playing so well and doing so well at the combine just kind of reinforces, oh, bless you there, reinforces the fact that this is one of the better tackle classes we've seen. And you were talking about
Mhm.
the receivers. I'm not exactly breaking ground by saying this or like saying something that hasn't already been said, but this has potentially or has the potential to be the best receiver class we've seen in maybe ever. Like just from a depth standpoint, I mean, you can go down to when we do our top 10, I don't know how in the world I'm going to do it. Like, I don't know how
Yeah.
I'm going to get to 10 because there's guys 15, 20 deep where you're like, that guy's going to contribute in the NFL day one, or he should.
Yeah.
And you
Yep.
just don't often see that. Like it's really hard to have that many guys that just from like obviously half of them could be bad. We don't it's a draft, right? None of us really know for sure. But just from like
Mhm.
what they've shown you and how they measured in and what they look like, the fact that there's that many guys who are probably day one contributors just doesn't happen really.
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly. And I think to your point, like having the depth at the position, being able to go late and find guys that are definitely going to contribute, guys that are going to be able to contribute, regardless of maybe scheme fit.
Right.
Um, and I mean, I'm a little biased because I like him a lot, but Ricky Pearsall is like an example. That's a guy
Yeah,
that I thought was going
he's
to
a lot
be,
of fun. 'Cause he just
yeah,
does everything really well, right? Like, there's
yeah,
nothing like, when you watch him, you're like,
yeah,
yeah, nothing stands out too heavily. I do think his hands are phenomenal. He might have the best hands in the draft. There's other guys I need to watch still, but, like, just in terms of consistency and the strength of them, I'd say he's
yeah,
certainly up there. He had that one, like, Odell type catch, I forget against what team.
yeah,
Just he has unbelievable just, like, a balance of skills that was probably gonna make him a day one, especially in the slot, but I think he could play a little bit outside too, but especially as, like,
mhm,
a day one slot contributor, probably
yeah,
can pencil him in for like you could give that guy 100 targets as a rookie, and I think he'd handle it. Like that's
yep,
kind of, and he's maybe what the 10th receiver, depending on who you ask. Like
yeah,
that's what I'm kind of getting at. Is like, and that's not an indictment of him though. Like that means he's like a second
yeah,
round player. But in this class, normally like a second round player is the fifth or sixth receiver. We're talking
yep,
about the 10th maybe, or however you want to
yep,
rank them. So it's gonna be fun when we
yeah,
talk about receivers, but we'll talk
definitely.
about some receivers today, technically, and in terms of like tight ends and stuff like that. But let's jump into our rankings. We'll do running backs first, for sure. I want
Okay.
to get into this. the consensus kind of opinion of this class at running back is definitely lower than it's been in a couple other classes recently. Like there isn't the guy that we consider like the Bijan type or maybe even the Gibbs type that went 12, which granted that was a shock to everybody, but still a guy like that could go that high. No one really seems to be in that range, at least based on what evaluators are saying. I still
Yeah.
like the backs though. Like they probably won't get taken as high as some of the other guys have been in the past 4 or 5 years, but there's guys here that I think you could contribute day one. And maybe I think the lack of a complete player is possibly there. Like I don't see most of these guys as like day one, like give them every snap, which that doesn't happen much anyway. Like how many guys are really the every down backs for teams anymore? So I don't even
Yeah.
try to really view that as a negative. But let's start with number 5 for you, Felix. Who do you have as your 5th running back right now with the class?
So it's funny that you say that because I was looking at this class and we talked about it a little bit off show. I kind of went into this without really much of a bias because I hadn't
Yeah,
followed running backs in particular,
never a
that
bad thing.
closely. Yeah,
So,
yeah. So I kind of went into this without too much of a bias or leniency toward anyone. But to your point, I also look at the holistic side of the player, and something people talk about with running backs is the tread and how many carries. And I feel like that's so funny because it's also a devalued position in the NFL,
yeah,
quote
it
unquote.
is.
So
Yeah.
these guys are going to be a part of committees. The tread's not as big of a deal.
Not as much as it was like 10, 15 years
Yeah,
ago for sure. So,
yeah, exactly. So there are a lot of guys here that I'm sure we both watched that have a lot of carries, a lot of experience, and they're definitively going to be guys who could be contributors. One of which is my number 5 guy. I have Blake Corum at number 5, and
okay.
I like Corum because I think he is. It's odd. I feel like running style and like aesthetic. He doesn't. Uh, Look like this player when he plays,
Okay.
but for Giants fans, for reference, he reminds me a lot of Ahmad Bradshaw.
Oh,
And it's
okay.
because
All
he's
right.
that smaller back who's built really well, who's got pretty good speed, nice little wiggle, but he's just like a tenacious runner and he's not going to stop, even though he measured out to my exact height, 5'7 3/4.
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
wow, obviously I'm not as chiseled and built as he is, but
Yeah.
like, but I was very impressed with his tape because he's a very patient runner, and I think something that sticks out for me is the fact that on the flip side of what people say about like JJ McCarthy and how he wasn't necessarily like the guy for Michigan,
Right.
Blake Corum, you could argue, was the guy at Michigan,
Yeah.
outside of Donovan Edwards. And as much as teams knew a running play was coming, he was still able to play patient, play behind what is a very good offensive line, and maximize the amount of space that he had to churn out yards. And I'm just impressed by like his immediate short area quickness. I think he's pretty solid in terms of like overall speed and everything. Had a decent combine performance and everything, but yeah, I have him at 5, namely because I just had the other 4 guys as a little bit better than he is, and I think Corum though is like a pretty well-rounded back overall. There is the size thing that might turn off some teams, but I think he's a well-proportioned athlete for the position, despite being that short, and he runs hard.
Yeah, and I will say with Corum, so he's not in my top 5. He is in my top 10, I would definitely say. I think that's
Mm,
very easy to say that my problem with him ultimately, and it's funny we talked about the tread thing. He is one of the few guys in this classroom, like the tread is certainly a question because they have
mhm.
really run this offense through him. He had the ACL injury as well while
Yeah,
Michigan, like his tape is very good. And I think if we're doing like top 5 most impactful rookie running backs, he would probably make my list because I think he's going to get playing time immediately wherever he goes.
yeah,
But when you're factoring in just overall draft ranking, he's going to be a little bit below 5 for me. But again, like his tape is very interesting because is for a smaller player, his physicality is what kind of sticks out to you. It's not really like he's not a fast player. I think his 40 was about as fast I could have expected him to run, which was nice to see that he had that. But like he's not a guy that's going to run away from you that often. He's definitely more of the quicker than fast type. But it's really the power at his size and the leverage that he can gain by being that smaller size and get on defenders. Like it allows him to run as hard as he does without it being a negative for a smaller player, right?
Mhm.
And so I'm curious to see. I personally think, and this is kind of going to be my take until it's proven wrong. I think that the Chargers are going to take him in the 3rd or 4th round. Hopefully, no earlier than that. Hopefully, they're going to give him 300 carries a year for 4 years, and his knees are going to disintegrate into dust, and then he's going to be a free agent for 2 months every year until he retires. Like that's kind of what I think is going to happen. Now, granted, that's not necessarily bad if you're him or Jim Harbaugh or the Chargers. Like that could be good, but that just feels like what's going to happen, right? Like they're like,
Mhm.
oh, he's sitting there, he's a 3rd round. All right, come on, all right, come over here, Blake. You thought you were done running 300 times? Screw it, come here. And then he's going to be the lead, back for them. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. But my 5th guy is a guy that I've talked about before. Felix, you mentioned that you thought this is a guy that when we talked pre-show that I might talk about. And I will say I can't take full credit for this because he's a guy that I did know about because of the Wisconsin ties, but it's especially Brett Coleman. I've kind of name dropped him a couple times. Love his stuff. He brought him up in a video a while back. Isaac Garendo from Louisville. 6'1", 220, measured in around that at the combine, the same size as they expect him to be. Runs a 4.33. Are you kidding me? Like, again, the 40 times don't matter that much ultimately, but when you see that and then you watch him, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, he looks like that. When he's in the open field, it matches.
Yeah.
That's the key thing. Is when it doesn't match, that's when you're like, all right, how much should I care about this? When it matches, though, you're like, all right, this guy is 6 foot something, 220, and he runs 4.33 like on the field too. I can get behind that. Not a ton of production in college. His only real year of production was this past year at Louisville. Really did a lot of good stuff in the receiving game as like a screen guy. Not probably going to run a lot of routes or anything like that. I'm not saying he's a true receiving back, but it can be a weapon there in like the short game and try to get him the ball in space. The lack of tread for a 5th-year player is pretty insane for a guy that's also going to probably get drafted, right? Like, I don't know how highly he'll get drafted. I think the combine kind of put people's eyes on him. I don't know if it really mattered to NFL evaluators. Obviously, I'm sure they've already known about him and had their opinions on him. But I do think that he could be part of a committee and be a really important part of one as kind of the primary runner. He's a really good one cutback. Like if you give him a lane, and you saw that with the 40, and if you watch his tape, he will take it all the way and most of the time. Like if you can see the back of his jersey, you might as well call different. You might as well just get ready for the next drive. Like it's over. Like, and for a guy that size and has power for
Yeah.
that size, it's just a rare combination, right? And if you're in a class like this that doesn't have like the true like superstar player, in my opinion, there's one guy that I think could become that, but he has some warts he has to iron out. You take a guy like that and you hope it works out. Like that's just kind of my opinion on him.
Yeah, no, I think him being at number 5 makes absolute sense. I think the fact that he has the lack of tread, it's funny. He's like in many ways like the opposite of what Corum is.
Almost
I mean,
entire like there could not be a more
yeah,
opposite player than him. Actually, it
yeah,
is funny that you said
speed, size, lack of tread. I mean, and the thing about him too, because I was able to watch a little bit of him as well, and oddly enough, he's number 6 for me, so he's like right there.
right. Yeah.
But he does everything pretty well, and I think that's the thing is it doesn't alarm me when I watch his tape that he's a player that has like significant hurdles to overcome to really contribute at the pro level.
Right.
So yeah, having him at 5 absolutely makes sense.
Yeah. So who do you have at 4 here?
So number 4 is pretty interesting because he is a lot like Blake Corum, but he is very much the opposite in terms of like the size. But
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be Braylon Allen. I actually was
Ooh.
impressed with Braylon Allen because again, the size is there. I mean, he's 6'1". I think he measured out at in like the 230s at the combine or something like that.
He was listed at 240 at Wisconsin, but I didn't think he
Yeah.
was 240, so I think it was 230s. Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit less than that. And granted, he might not have like top end speed or anything, but
No.
from a tape perspective, I was just very impressed by the physicality, the fact that he is a patient runner. But he might be just that typical north south guy, but I think he's someone that can actually handle volume. He's going to be someone who can contribute right away, especially like short yardage, goal line. But I think he's going to be a bit of a niche fit. He's got to like fall to the right team that's going to use him in the correct way. The maybe be that short yardage guy or be that like first, second down like tone setter. But yeah, I just kept thinking like seeing him in like a Lions uniform, seeing him in a Cowboys uniform, like I was immediately like, this guy could be literally, and not that the Lions need a running back per se, but like I could see him being that sort of thunder to thunder and lightning in like a combo backfield, and he just looks the part in terms of being like an NFL caliber player. I know that there is going to be limitations from like a pass game perspective,
Yeah.
but I think he definitively has the frame to be like a consistent pass protector. And I think he's decent enough of an athlete that the ball skills could probably come up into play if you had him like on passing downs. And, he has to demonstrate that, of course. But he just seemed like a very steady prospect to me. And that's what really stuck out to me the most was I just felt like if I drafted him, I was like, yeah, he's my starter. I wouldn't necessarily be um, underwhelmed.
It's funny that you talked about Allen because again, Wisconsin ties, Wisconsin back. As I've mentioned in multiple podcasts, I am a Wisconsin fan loosely, not as much of a fan as some other people might be of their college teams, but
Mm-hmm.
he's kind of been in that same vein as like really a lot of Wisconsin backs, right? Like they're very very productive in college. The success in the NFL varies. Sometimes you get Jonathan Taylor, sometimes you get Ron Dane. If we're going way back, like
Yeah.
Monte Ball before he was okay before he kind of lost his mind for a minute there, but that's whatever. Uh, so there's variance there, right? But they've always produced NFL caliber backs. The
Mm-hmm.
thing with Allen, he's in my top 10 as well, not inside my top 5 as someone who watched a lot of him, mostly not because of anything that's necessarily wrong with him. Is that again, I think his skill set is pretty limited compared to some of the
Mm-hmm.
other guys inside my top 5 in the right role. And Casey actually just threw a comment in here. Derrick Henry reincarnated. The problem is, I think the Titans would make a lot of sense, but not as
Mm-hmm.
a Derrick Henry replacement, but as just a bigger back to pair with Spears to kind of save his legs a little bit. Because the thing with Spears, if you guys remember, watching here, he does have some knee stuff. Like I guess his ACL basically doesn't exist as far as I know, like something along those lines. Like something's
Yeah.
up there. So if you can kind of get a bigger back to handle the first and second down workload a lot of the time to pair with him, I think that'd be really smart with Henry kind of out the door. But see, Allen doesn't have the speed. That's the thing is he doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have these straight line speed. It's good for his size. Like his athleticism for his size is really good. It's just when you
Mm-hmm.
compare him to overall like athleticism at the position, I do think he falls a little short, and that is going to limit the ceiling of a player like that. The passing game stuff, I mean, he's not, he's a bigger back, right? He's not going to be fluid out of the backfield. He's not going to make guys miss, in that way. I think his quickness is good in the whole, like his initial burst and everything is good. It's just he will
Mm-hmm.
get caught by NFL level athletes, and it's going to be very much like a committee player, like you said.
Yeah.
Now, again, is that worth drafting one of the top? Like, is it worth him being one of the top 5 running backs? Maybe. I think it just comes down to how you feel about the rest of the class. But I'm glad you
Yeah.
mentioned him though, because he is a very interesting guy to kind of
Yeah.
like how do NFL teams view him is gonna be very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
For me, fourth guy, I have Marshawn Lloyd out of USC. This is kind
Gotcha.
of just again like kind of almost in the Blake Corum, like because he's also an older prospect, 23, been in USC a while. He's just an all-around good player, I think. I don't think he has any standout traits per se. I think he's got good quickness. His speed is good enough. Like he ran well at the combine, which was nice to see. Bigger guy overall. I think 210 plus. I think he weighed in at just a
Mm-hmm.
good overall. This guy feels like a running back that's going to play a long time. Now, is he ever going to be a true starter? Is he ever going to be more than like a 200 touch guy, which is nowadays is really kind of what you want is a guy who can handle about 200 touches or so and kind of split those up. But again, though, with a guy like this, I feel like if you draft him in the 3rd round and you need a starter, I think he can handle it. But if you just need another back that you don't have to hand the ball off to more than 10, 15 times, he also can just handle that. And maybe you can have a passing down back to handle a lot of the other stuff, like whatever it may be. Just feels like a really good part of a committee that,
Yeah.
again, you're not going to have to draft high. You can put him in there and he should be able to produce at a high enough level for you. And you kind of just can forget about running back for a little bit. And in this class, that kind of puts you at 4.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny that you have him at 4. I had him at 3.
Okay, well,
So
you
he was
can
going to be
talk
my
about him
next one.
more. Yeah, just talk about him more right now. Then, what do you think about him?
Yeah, no, I think it's funny because my first two guys I felt were more niche players that I think I could see playing in the NFL, having a definitive
Yeah.
role right away, or
Hmm.
maybe lasting if they end up being a part of like a committee approach or something like
Right.
that. Um, and from 3 up is where I started getting to guys that I think are having like a much more well-rounded sort of game. And I think Marshawn Lloyd is that first player in my top 5 at least who fits that bill, can do everything really well. I think outside of what Taj Washington, he's probably the best player USC had
Yeah.
that wasn't the quarterback, you know?
Yeah. Probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably.
And I think he was a valued part of that offense, and it's funny because it makes me wonder how good would that offense have been if the offensive line was better and maybe they had one more sort of receiving threat, and keeping that balanced approach, but yeah, I think he's a pretty solid pass protector, natural receiver out the backfield, um, pretty good, athlete for the position.
Good enough
I
for
think
sure. I would say.
yeah, definitely good enough for the position. I think he is interesting as a runner because I feel like in space he's pretty solid and everything like that. I just felt like sometimes on tape he can be a little indecisive in terms of like when he wants to go north and south. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
A little bit of the indecisiveness is there for sure. It's something he's
yeah,
got to get
so
better at.
that's something that I think could definitively get coached up, you know what I mean? But it's about him actually putting that into practice and making that like an effective part of his game. But yeah, I honestly think he is one of those guys that you draft and I think he's gonna get snaps for sure. Can he be like the guy? That's the question. But he definitely is sort of like a jack of all trades, master of none type of player to me, and I think he's going to be able to like definitely contribute to a team.
Yeah, that's kind of again the same thought I have on him, where it's like if you draft this guy, he should be a good NFL running back. I don't think he'll be a great one, but I also don't
Mhm.
think he's going to be a guy that just can't play, right? Like there's that
Yeah.
kind of safety with him, where I think between the experience level and what he showed on tape in that offense, that again, as much as people want to like talk about Lincoln Riley and the offensive guru stuff, like that offense was just not good. Like it was not
Uh-huh.
very well coached. It was not very well thought out. Like it was kind of tough watching tape at USC this year at times. So definitely got to give him credit for dealing with that. My third guy, since he was your third, Jalen Wright out of Tennessee. This guy just goes like
Yeah.
just absolutely flies, and I think for a player that is still in his 20s, like early, I should say, still say 20. Going to be 20 here. I think he might turn 21 before the draft, but a younger player doesn't have a ton. Again, we talked about Tread, doesn't have a ton of carries in his career, played in an open kind of offense in Tennessee that, while is very gimmicky and very strange, I think in terms of the run game, it's very much just, run game is run game to a certain degree, in college or in the NFL. The thing with him is I think that he does lack, because partly the lack of overall touches probably in his career. He doesn't have great vision at this point. I do think he struggles with that at times, and that's why like when the big plays happen, they're great, but they don't happen as much as they probably could because of that. But
Hmm.
he has enough, I think, power to his game. He's not obviously a power back, but I don't think he's like one of those guys that just gets tackled at first contact. He has enough, balance in that way to not just be a guy that's either a 50-yarder or a 4-yarder. Like it's
Hmm.
kind of, there's a balance there with him. Again, like I'm just very partial to guys who can create big chunk plays. Like if you're going to draft a running back early, I prefer them to be guys that can, if given even the slightest chance of a big play, can make it happen. Because a lot of these guys, and that's why the position has been devalued, they are very much one and the same for the most part. Like you can get similar production from 35, 40 different running backs at a time. But if you
Hmm.
have a special trait, in this case, a guy like him, his speed, his explosiveness, that means something to me. Like that's something I can work with, because now if I can get my line just to block well enough on a couple big plays a year, that can change the outcome of games. Look at what happened with Jonathan Taylor and the Colts the year that they should have gone to the playoffs, but Carson Wentz happened, of course. But like that, he was, I mean, MVP candidate at times, right? Because a big reason for that is he has a few warts as a runner, but his explosiveness in the open field, like when he gets a lane, he runs away from everyone. right? Like that's something
Mhm.
that is really important if you want to be one of those top echelon backs, in my opinion. So he's my
Yeah.
third guy for sure. I think that he's going to be really good, especially as a younger player. Might take a while to get going, depending on where he goes, but I think he could become the main guy in a committee here very soon.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. He's one of those guys who's electric, who is a big play waiting to happen. And what's funny about him, I think I read this somewhere. I think despite like the history of running backs at his school, he was the fastest to 1,000 yards
Yeah,
in his career, which is like very, or in a season, I should say. So that was like really impressive. And yeah, just the burst, the electric game. I completely agree with you. I don't think I can add anything to it, but he's a great player. I actually had him outside my top five, interestingly enough. But
I get
I still
it.
think,
He's a guy that could be a boomer bust with the way he plays. Like he could end up just
mhm,
not having enough vision at the next
yeah,
level. And
yeah,
with gaps getting smaller and there being less room, like he's a guy like I would take him earlier than a lot of these other guys simply because of the potential there, but
yeah.
still probably like a early third at the earliest still. And just because we're talking back here. So
Yeah, yeah, no, no, no. I completely like understand that for sure. Um, funny, number two is kind of a guy who I view in some of the same light, and I kind
mhm.
of understand the I guess what entices people about him. But number two for me is Jonathan Brooks. I
Okay.
think Brooks, younger player, I think he's like 6 foot 200, something around there. That's like the average for the position.
He's right
But
around average size, I think. Yeah.
yeah, but I think like in watching like his film, I mean, it's understandable why people are like excited about his potential at the NFL
Mhm.
level. I think he's one of those like big slasher type of players. And kind of a one cut and go, and really identifies like that amount of space that he needs in order to maximize the amount of yards that he's able to get. Um, I do uh, I do wonder though about just I don't know. I wonder about how much he'll translate in terms of like the entirety of the game, like from pass blocking and all that. He wasn't asked to do that like that often. Um, but he it I think he could be someone who has like a ton of potential and could explode into being one of those guys who didn't have like too much at the collegiate level, but then gets to the NFL level, and NFL coaching really accelerates like what he could be. He has the traits for the position, good body type and speed and everything like that. But I think the big play style flashes the, I guess potential, but there's inconsistencies and you don't see it often enough. And I think that it's like you're scratching the surface when you watch like the Texas tape.
Yeah.
And it makes me think like, yeah, this kid, like he's like that player that you get frustrated with. Cause like,
Mhm.
I don't know, like he has the body type, but then he like runs hot. He runs kind of like upright a little bit. That frustrates me because I'm like, dude, you're kind of like a good proportion back who could stay low, and you'd be able to maximize your momentum a little bit better by cutting and being low to the ground a little bit more. And yeah, I don't know, like he kind of frustrates me, but I just watch his tape and I keep thinking like he's one of those that it's going to be boom or bust. Like he goes to the right situation and he can end up having a nice long career as a contributor on a team or multiple teams or whatever, since it seems like running backs go everywhere now.
Yeah, they
But
don't last long in one place typically.
yeah, but I think he is someone that has a lot of the traits that you want out of the position, and some of it I just think could get coached out. So that's why I have him at two. But I do think he's one of the guys that I feel like I could come back and watch his tape again, and I could easily be like, I might put him at six. Like I don't know, like
He
I just feel
yeah,
kind of all over with him a bit. I just think the potential is so high. So I
yeah.
rank him highly because there might be a team that loves him, and they decide to draft him a little higher than you would anticipate or something like that.
Yeah, and it's funny, I have him at 2 as well.
Okay.
So we're in agreement there. So I think we're gonna have the same top guy, but we'll wait till we get through Jonathan Brooks here. It's in a similar vein to what you were saying about Brooks. I think his biggest issue is the fact that he sat behind two NFL running backs and just hasn't played a lot. Like you
Yeah.
can when you watch him, you're like, this looks like a guy who hasn't played a lot of football.
Yeah.
And with
Yeah.
his traits, it didn't matter a ton. And with the talent around Texas, didn't matter a ton when he was playing. But
Mm.
I think his decision making as a runner is questionable to say the least at times. Like I think he
Hmm.
hunts for the big play a lot because he knows he can make it. And
Yeah.
and I think at the next level, if he continues to do that, we saw that a little bit with Barkley, where like as great of a season as he had as a rookie, there was a lot of times where I'm like, man, you could have had 8 yards there, but instead you wanted 50, so you got two.
Yeah.
And like that works if you're Barkley, that can be okay because you get the 50 a lot. You know, I mean, like you get
Yeah.
that. But with Brooks, like I don't think he's quite the same athlete as Barkley, obviously. And the
Yeah.
size thing is different with Barkley too. But like when you're that type of player, it works well in college when you're going against guys who just quite simply aren't as good as you a lot of the time.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
when you're playing on a team, like I said, like Texas, that is so good that there's a lot of space. But I think the thing that really surprised me a little bit is just from what I heard about him before I watched him is he doesn't have as much straight line speed as I thought he was going to have.
Hmm.
Like it's good. It is plenty good enough. But I do think he's a quicker than fast a little bit. Like he's got, I would say like high 4.4s speed is what I would guess if he ran, which is totally
Yeah.
good for a running back, especially.
Yeah.
But he doesn't run away from people with the regularity that a Jalen Wright does, or the guy that we're going to talk about probably at one does. I don't think he has quite that amount of straight line speed and explosiveness. Now that doesn't matter much, like that much, if you are fast enough. But
Yeah.
for me, like for example, you're talking about places he could go. Like I think if he goes to the Packers, he'd be a great Aaron Jones replacement in a year.
Hmm.
Like I think that'd be great. Like I think that's kind of who he might profile as, is like a guy like Jones is fast, but I wouldn't say he's like the fastest guy in the world. He's built well for a running back, but not the biggest guy
Yeah.
either. He's a good pass catcher. I think Brooks definitely
Yeah.
has that in his game too. Like I think that'd be a great fit for him to develop into that type of player. But again,
Hmm.
if he goes to a team who needs, like if he goes to the Cowboys, I think it'd be great for them if it works out, but there's a potential that he kind of runs into a wall early and maybe just doesn't develop from there because they
Yeah.
probably ask him to carry the ball a lot if they do that.
Yeah.
So I love what I see from him and the potential, like you said, but I do think there's things that could make his early career maybe not start out so well. And when you're a running back, if you're not good early, you probably won't be given a chance to be good late. Like that's just kind of what it comes down to a lot of the time. It's unfortunate, but they
Yeah.
don't have the same timeline that a quarterback or a receiver or a corner or whoever does, where you're kind of expected to hit the ground running literally at the next level whenever you're running back versus other positions, right? So hopeful for him. Still number 2 for me right now. I do think he's going to stay there most likely. But why
Yeah.
don't you give me number 1 and we'll see if we're in agreement. And if so, we can kind of just talk about him and then get to tight ends here.
Yeah. Yeah. Number one for me is I think Dalton will be happy. It's Trey Benson.
Yeah.
I
And
was
he
gonna
is my
say,
one. He is my one as well. Yeah. So we can talk
yeah.
about him.
Benson to me is the most polished, most well-rounded running back in the class. He's the one that I watch and I just see NFL running back. I see a guy who could be an RB1, and honestly, it's going to be maybe, uh, I don't know, maybe it sounds like I'm exaggerating, but I feel like if he was a prospect in 2002, he would be a first round pick,
Yeah. For sure.
because
For sure he would
I
be.
mean, just the
Uh,
yeah, perfect frame, good, uh, excellent size for the position,
yep.
awesome speed, great
It's got
burst.
awesome speed. Yeah.
Yeah, good short area quickness, good decisiveness as a runner. The physicality is there. And then in terms of the passing game, I think from what I saw, pretty solid pass protector, feisty player, and a contributor in the receiving game as well. Good hands, soft hands, and what I liked about him was he was like natural in that aspect, in the sense that like he catches the ball and the transition to
A
like
runner. Yeah.
securing and transitioning to a runner was smooth every
Mhm.
time. So he looks like a natural just at the position. And I just think like I said, he's a guy that I don't blame Dalton for like saying in our first episode, like this is a kid I could see one of the playoff teams in the late 20s, 30s being like, we
Yeah.
love him, let's get him. But I think I don't know if he'll go first round per se.
I don't think so.
Personally,
There's a
yeah,
reason why, but I'll talk about it with him. But
yeah. But I definitely think this is a guy who like I said, early 2000s. Oh my god, yeah, teams would be like chomping at the bit to get him.
yeah, what it comes down to for me is I think Benson is the best pure runner in the class and
Mhm,
one of the better ones we've seen in a while as just a
mhm,
pure runner. Now, I will say the two things are going to keep me from being willing to say he's a first round pick. As much as he's great when the ball gets into his hands, but he's not the best receiver. He's not going to be a guy that runs routes at the next level. He's going to be a screen guy, like a flats, stuff like that. He's not going to be running any sort of complex routes or anything like that. He's not a receiving back, right?
mhm,
Also, he could get your quarterback killed in pass protection. Like he
mhm.
needs to get better at that, which is why I think a team, if you're going to take him, you have to have that guy. You have to have a third
Yeah.
down back, even if it's a guy that mostly just catches a few balls and can pass protect. If you have a guy like that, or you think you can get one, and you can have Benson be your lead back, now you're in business, right? You give him
Mhm.
10, 15, 20 carries a game, that you'll get a lot of production out of him. Now, I will say another thing. He is very much the like prototypical, like for his size, especially in speed, a one cut running back. Like
Yeah.
he'll make you miss a little bit. He definitely had a lot of broken tackles forced in college. Like he had one of the higher rates of that. But a lot of that is his contact balance is about as good as I've seen in a very long time. Like
Yeah.
guys hitting him does not mean anything to him most of the time. Now, again,
Mhm.
in college, he didn't always face the best competition. The ACC is kind of hit or miss at times. As someone who is very close to Pitt, uh, not great sometimes. Uh, Pitt's taken astray, of course, right now. No, but the contact balance is just kind of insane to me. Like watching him get hit by somebody and just not really affect him at all is
Yeah.
hilarious at times. Now, granted, some of these kids are not the biggest guys in the world. They're just kind of doing the best. But I could see a lot of 20, 30, 40-yard plays in the NFL for him
Mhm.
because he's
Mhm.
going to run through people around them, by them. Another guy that if you see the back of his jersey, you might as well jog to the sideline. Like it's not going to happen. I'm sorry. Like unless you can
Mhm.
play Tyreek Hill at defense, I don't think you're going to get a chase down on him very often. You know what I mean? Very similar to Jonathan Taylor. Like those two are very similar players in my opinion. If you're looking at that, it's either a great thing or a bad thing, depending on which year you look at with Jonathan Taylor. But assuming the health's there, which that's the other kind of ding on him, he's had ACL, he's had other injuries. If he can be healthy, I think he's going to be the best runner out of this class. Now, a guy like
Mhm.
Brooks, because I think he's a better pass blocker and a better pass receiver at this point in his career, could overtake him in terms of like overall skill set. It could be like a Kamara thing where it's like, you know, Fournette looked early on like the best pure runner, but then the McCaffreys and the Kamaras came up and it was like, no, we're better than that. We could do other things. Could be looking at something like that, but I do think that he's at least good enough as a receiver to be effective, and the pass blocking will hopefully come along over time.
Yeah. Yeah. I like exactly what you said too about how it could be that situation of like, yeah, the Kamaras, McCaffreys are the ones that come up and end up having like really good
Longer, better
careers because they could do
careers, yeah.
more. Yeah.
But I don't
But
really see one of those guys in this class. Like Bucky Irving, I was
yeah,
kind of interested in, but like his workout, like I hope he was hurt because he looked not great in
yeah.
workouts. It was not awesome, unfortunately. So
Yeah, he was one of those guys that if you had to like look at who performed and who was a loser, like yeah, he
unfortunately, but
really I was very like kind of shocked at how I don't know, it's like he performed not to go too much on a tangent, but it seemed like he was like not sure of himself the entire
it
workout
was
because he
it did
looks
not
so
seem
much
comfortable.
faster on tape.
Right, he did not seem
Yeah,
comfortable. I'm hoping something's just up with him because he's a guy that wouldn't be in my top 5 just because I don't think he's a pure runner or anything like that, but I think
yeah.
that he could have a really nice role on an NFL team if he plays like he did
Mhm.
at Oregon, but, let's get into our top 5 tight ends. I think this one we'll probably spend a little bit less time on just because again, there's kind of especially a top guy that I doubt is gonna be different between us, but then, at least I hope not, or I did see some people be like, "Well, he's not my top tight end because actually he's a receiver." It's like, "Ah, shut up. We get it.
Yeah,
We know it. We
right,
know, okay?
okay.
I get it. He played like 60% of his snaps in the slot. Whatever. Get over it.
Yeah,
Fine.
yeah.
Call him a receiver." Anyway, Who do you have at number 5? Because this is, I feel like, a very wide open position after the first couple guys, and I have someone who I was already interested in before the combine because of my
Mhm.
affiliation with another site, but we'll talk about that. Who's your number 5 guy?
So again, this is a position group that, like I said, with the running backs, I don't know. I didn't think the Giants were going to be spending a lot of time on it because I
Yeah, and
thought
then
Darren Waller
Darren
was going to
Waller.
play. Yeah,
Yeah,
and then Darren
he sure
Waller.
doesn't seem like it, right?
No, yeah.
Sure
Now
doesn't
he
seem like
wants
it.
to. I don't know, like what's going on, but hey, to each their own. If he decides he wants to hang it up, he wants to hang it up. But
Yeah, don't
uh,
play if your heart's not in it, like he said. But
yeah, yeah. At least he's not retiring like during a game or something. Uh,
yeah, no one's ever done that before, right?
right? Yeah,
Never heard of
no,
that.
that like
Never heard of
never
that happening
happens.
before for like I don't know Buffalo perhaps or something like that. Yeah.
Right?
Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, no, but yeah, so I went into the film study without like that much bias or anything like that.
Right.
So really went into this kind of clean slate, just watching tape and figuring out who it is that I like. And number 5 for me was Ben Sinnott.
Ooh,
I think,
okay.
yeah, yeah, I think he's a guy that's going to be higher um, for some other people. I think, uh, for me, it's namely that he is, I think, a pretty well-rounded tight end. I just don't know if he has the ceiling of some of the other guys in terms of like the applicability to multiple schemes, and then just also the polish at the position for what he could do every down. But I think pretty solid athlete, pretty impressive. I've seen some people have him as like the second tight end, so like that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
But for me, it's mostly just about the potential, the ceiling. I just don't see him being like the guy that becomes the starting tight end for a team and is uh consistently sort of a feature part of that offense. I
Okay.
could see
Yeah.
him being maybe a 2 and being that guy that kind of gets snaps here and there, 2 tight end sets, something like that. Um but I yeah, I mean, I was impressed by him. I just wasn't like blown away. I wasn't
Yeah.
overwhelmed by like his tape. I just think he is uh the first tight end that I look at that I say I would draft him, and I feel like I got a guy that's going to contribute. And but that's it. That's kind of where
Right.
like I leave it at with him.
Right. And I'll talk about him real quick before I talk about my top 5 because he's a 3 for me. So he's my third tight end.
Gotcha.
And
Gotcha.
I don't really disagree with much of what you said. I think the thing with him and kind of the same reason Lloyd is like 4 for me, a running back, is I think he
Hmm.
does everything very well. Like you
Hmm.
watch him at Kansas State, he's a really good route runner for a tight end. His athleticism is definitely good enough. I think he tested super well. I don't know if he's quite the athlete he tested at
Hmm.
on film, but definitely
Sure.
noticeably, quick. And I think the fact that they threw him a lot of screens kind of tells you all you
Yeah.
need to know about his ability after the catch. Like he can run after the catch, make some guys miss occasionally. Got good enough speed to kind of explode out of his stance and get down the field a little bit. And they
Hmm.
targeted him down the field a lot for a guy that isn't as athletic as maybe people expected him to be for what his role was for Kansas State. Like
Yeah.
he had a lot of big plays. And I just think because of the fact he does everything pretty well, he could easily be like a top 15 tight end because there's not that many good tight ends in the NFL. Like that's
That's
the
true.
sad part
Yeah.
like about it is like it's not so much that he's a great prospect, but the fact that he already does everything pretty well makes me think
Hmm.
that when he gets to the league, he could take on a tight end one role for a team that really needs it or something like that. Like kind of, maybe that's the Giants, right? Then again, I kind of felt the same way about Bellinger, but that's a whole other thing from a different time. So maybe he can play. But yeah, I wanted to shout him out because you talked about him at 3. Like I think he's or at 5. I think he's a really good player, but I see why you wouldn't love him as much just because again, I think the ceiling is a little lower than maybe the other guys that I have here. My
Hmm.
fifth is Theo Johnson out of Penn State. Now he blew up the combine, and I mean blew up the combine. Number 2 tight end all time in RAS. If you're a fan of that, shout out Kentley Platt. Got to give him some flowers here. Love me some RAS. Love the cards
Yes.
coming out. Super
Yeah.
excited for that every year. But no, like there's a reason why he's like that is so popular because it does mean something to a lot of positions. Now tight end
Hmm.
is hit or miss with that, but like Johnson on tape is not the athlete that he tested as. I'm just going to point that out. Like he is not the second most athletic tight end to ever play or to ever exist, right? Like I'm sorry, it just isn't. But a lot of that stuff does translate. I think he is a very explosive player initially, especially. I think his long speed is not as good as his 40 time. I think that he's definitely just kind of has a good get off, but I don't know if he has that second gear to kind of break
Mhm.
away in the open space. Really good red zone target, had I think 11 touchdowns and less than like 60 catches or 60 receptions in college. Um, just a really well-rounded player too, actually. Like his blocking ability, he's a full-size tight end, which you don't get a lot often anymore, like 6'6", 260. He's very much a throwback, like wide tight end type guy. Like, and he played in the slot at times at PSU, but I think he's going to be more of a true inline guy in the NFL, which some teams are going to value that a lot because there's just not many guys who come out anymore that follow that kind of path that also are athletic enough, as he showed, to be an impact in the passing game. I do just
Mhm.
wonder, like, can he be a true like passing game weapon down to down? I doubt that a little bit. They also threw him some screens, and he can definitely run after the catch, but he's very much a linear athlete. Like I don't think he has a ton of quickness, which does impact his ability as a runner with the ball. Just a really good player overall. I'm not sure how early I would take him, but I do
Mhm.
think he's in that top 5 conversation for sure, and I have him at 5 right now.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. Funny enough, you and I have it flipped. I have him 3.
Okay,
Um,
so yeah, you can
and
talk about what you like with him then too.
yeah, I think I don't know, slightly biased because I'm just a big fan of the guys who are like the true Y tight ends
Right
that are
before,
also
because they're
athletes.
just rare, right? You don't see a lot of them
Yeah,
now. So
yeah, exactly. And I think that's the thing for me about him is what's going to get him on the field for a team and potentially be like a highly productive and big contributor to an offense is the fact that he can block. And a lot of tight ends now are these guys who are like kind of mismatches, who can move around pretty well. They can catch the ball, but then they're just complete liabilities when it comes to blocking.
mhm.
And the fact that he tested well, and you see some of it on tape in terms of the burst and the ability for even the long speed or whatever you want to reference in terms of just his use of his legs and his movement in space, that to me is impressive for a guy who I look at as well as that Y inline type of player. So I feel like that makes him very scheme versatile because if you want to go to uh, the Chargers and just run some old school football with Jim Harbaugh,
Yeah, that he feels like a Jim Harbaugh tight end. Yeah.
right? He's going to be a guy that's going to be able to sit inline block and then be a threat on those like play actions where you got a linebacker on him. He's probably going to outrun the linebacker
Yeah,
because
if you give
he
him
is,
a way to run, he can get down the field, so
yeah. And then he's got the frame as well to be a mismatch. So it's like, even if you have someone who is going to be able to run with him because there are some pretty athletic linebackers out there and you got
oh, yeah.
safeties that cover tight ends, he's going to be a mismatch in terms of the
Yeah,
size and
volume.
he'll high point the ball. And like you pointed out, red zone threat, right? So that's why I had him at 3. I just look at him as outside of the number 1 guy who everyone is going to say receiver, whatever. But to me, he has one of those complete profiles where,
Yeah.
like you said, does everything well, maybe not at a very high level, but because of the position in the NFL, the quality of the position in the NFL, that's probably going to get him staying with a team or on multiple teams and getting reps
Yeah.
often. You know what I mean? So, like, it's funny. Uh, he's not the same athlete or anything per se, but like I think about like Dalton Schultz or something like that, where it's like he's not this like super impressive tight end or anything, but he's got the size. He's a bit of an athlete, and somehow he's starting and he sticks. He contributes. He
Yeah.
did it with Dallas. He's with Houston now, and like
Got a nice
he's carving
contract
out
to
he's
be there.
carving out a nice career. And I can see
Yeah.
that for Theo, where it's like he may not be a top 10 or a top 5, I would say, tight end in the NFL, but he's going to be a guy that we're not going to be surprised when he's like year 7, year 8, and maybe he's on his second or third team, but he's been pretty good for like every one of those teams he's been with.
Yeah, I think so too. And just before I get into my well, actually, your number 4 guy here, I will say my comp for him actually because I write for Penn State, for a Penn State site I've talked about a couple of times.
Yeah.
He's more athletic than this guy, especially in a straight line. But Cole Kmet was who I landed on out of Notre Dame,
Ooh.
the Bears tight end.
Yeah.
Very productive player so far in his
Hmm.
career. Kind of gets talked about poorly at times because I know that specifically JT O'Sullivan in the quarterback school, shout out him, loves to call him tackle eligible. I think is what his name is for him at times, which is both a negative and a positive because he's a really good blocker. He's super effective at that, but sometimes he doesn't move so smoothly, right? And I think Theo is a little bit clunky because of his size. I think he's definitely more athletic than Cole, but I think they could have similar impacts on their team, if that makes sense. Like I think they can have similar
Yeah.
production and stuff like that. So, but who's your number 4 guy?
Number 4, I have Cade Stover.
Okay, Ohio State
Cade,
tight end. Okay,
yeah, Cade, very similar. I won't spend too much time on him because it's similar to Theo in the sense that I look at him as that true inline that could end up having a solid career. He's a solid blocker,
mm-hmm.
and he's a good enough receiver that I think he's going to be able to contribute, irregardless of whatever the scheme is. And I thought his combine was actually pretty solid. He looked
Yeah, I
like,
think he tested as well as I would have hoped he
yeah,
would for him. Yeah,
exactly. He tested it just as well as I thought, like, would have been ideal for his stock, and pretty good movement skills and everything. To me, he looks like, next to Theo, the most like traditional sort of
tight
like
end. Yeah,
wide tight end, for the position. But I simply have him at 4 under Theo just because I think Theo has more of the upside from the athletic standpoint.
yeah, I would say
You
so.
know what I mean? But I think they're both sort of interchangeable depending on what you're looking for. If you're looking for that Y guy, you're not really going to uh, fault for picking either of them. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's why I had Cade at 4. Very similar to Theo, just not as much of the athlete, but definitely a solid player.
Yeah, I like KT. He's number 6 for me. He's right outside the
Mhm.
top 5. I think he's going to be a really solid player. I
Mhm.
do just think again, like I think he is just slightly more limited upside than Theo, which is why he's 6 and Theo's 5 for me. I feel like
Mhm.
4 is going to be the spot where we have different players entirely then because I have Jaheim Bell out of FSU as my number 4 tight end.
Nice, nice, nice,
He's
nice.
a guy that he's a offensive weapon type for me. I don't think he's a true tight end in the sense that like he's not going to play in line a ton. He's not going to be this guy that is asked to block a ton from that position, but you're going to be
Mhm.
able to move him around. He's actually very similar. I think he's not as fast as this player, but Chigakonkwo for the Titans, him coming out of
Mm.
Maryland, very similar skill sets, very similar players in terms of like sometimes they're an H back, sometimes they line up in the backfield, sometimes they're a tight end, sometimes they're in the slot. Like he has that versatility. And going back to even at South Carolina, like he kind of was like a big receiver a lot of the time, right? And they kind of
Yeah,
moved him into more of that hybrid role with FSU, and it really suited him really well, I think. I think being able to get
yeah,
him in the backfield, run routes from there, kind of use him as a runner at times, even. I know they handed the ball a couple times. Like he's a very much like a versatile weapon type of player. And I think in a tight end class that is lacking a lot of high upside guys, having him
mhm,
for me, I just think that he is a player that could have a role regardless of who you have at tight end already, right? Like he doesn't have to play a traditional tight end role. Similar also like a Jonnu Smith, right?
yeah,
Like that type of
yeah.
move tight end that you get him in different spots on the field, ask him to do different things. And I think he could be a productive player in really almost any team, in my opinion. So
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. I have Jaheim Bell at number 6,
okay.
and
So our
even though
guys that are
he's
different are at 6. Yeah.
yeah, even though he is number 6 for me,
Mhm.
he's actually one of my favorite players in the draft.
He's a lot of fun to watch. He is.
Yeah,
A
and
lot of
he's
his good
just
stuff.
he's a weapon. And I
Mhm.
just came away. He's not the same athlete, but like by any means, but he struck me a lot as like Delaney Walker, where he's that like
Oh, okay.
that undersized tight end, but
Right.
has movement skills.
Yes,
He
because of
can,
that size.
yeah, you ask him to block and he's not going to be the best blocker out there, but he's going to try his damnedest,
Yeah,
you
he
know.
gives a good effort for sure. On the
Yeah.
move, I think he's
Really
fine,
good effort.
especially.
But I think he's that guy, like he's a mismatch nightmare. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like you're going to be able to put him in positions where like he's in the backfield, you motion him out into the slot, and then you get a tight end on him, and it's like, oh, hey, this might be my guy right here. Or you might be able to motion him out wide if you got everybody over to the left or something like that. Still got that mismatch. He's gonna be, yeah, just someone who I think a creative offensive coordinator is gonna really be able to
Yes.
move him around and toy around with him and make him be like I could easily see him his rookie year being a guy who gets like 400 to 500 yards because he ends up on
Mhm.
the right offense and he's definitely not like the number one or number two or number three target, but like he's contributing.
Yeah,
You know what I
he's a
mean? So
manufactured touch guy that also plays tight end, which is a weird combo, but I think it
yeah,
works for him, right? I think it's kind of
yeah,
what he does well. So
yeah,
definitely happy with him there.
yeah.
So I will say I didn't mention it, or I did mention it. So I have Synod at 3. So who do you have
Mhm.
at 2 then? I think is we're both at 2 now.
Okay. At two, I have Jatavian
Right.
Sanders.
We have the same top 2 then. Okay. So
Yeah, we got
Sanders,
the same top two.
let's talk about him. I wanted to mention real quick, his
Yeah,
combine is going to turn people off a little bit. He didn't run
yeah.
as fast as people expected, all that stuff. Here's the thing. To me, he's very similar to Isaiah Likely for the Ravens, where he
Ooh.
didn't
Mhm.
run well, but I guarantee you, you watch the film, he runs plenty well enough. He is a faster player on film than he is at the combine, for sure. Like,
Yeah,
it's noticeable that he moves better than the guys around him at times. And
yeah.
with that, and I want to give you a chance, obviously, to talk about him too, but like, he is, if you're not taking Bowers, right? And that, well, let's just be honest, he's when we know he's number one, we don't have to like tiptoe
Yeah.
around it. Like, if you need a tight end who can be one of the focal points of your offense, or
Mhm,
potentially one of them, to me, he's the only guy that I think fits that description other than Bowers. And that's why he has to be a number 2. Like, you can funnel offense through him to a certain degree, and I think be
mhm.
successful with that. So, but what do you think
Yep.
about it?
No, I was gonna say the exact same thing. To me, he's like one of those guys that even though, yeah, sure, he didn't test with that speed that you see on tape. I just always take that as like that's the dude who just needs to be motivated by violence. Like, okay, I don't want to get hit. I'm gonna
Yeah.
outrun this guy.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
he runs his ass off when he
He
has
really
to.
does. Yeah.
Um,
He can move.
but yeah, and sure, testing numbers may not have been great, but he just looks very fluid and very smooth. He looks like it's funny because I think I didn't see his weight for the combine, like what he officially came in at, but I think
I know. I'm pretty sure it was in the 240s or 50s, I think.
okay, because I
I'd
was
have to
gonna
double
say
check.
I know he's listed like 245 at Texas, so around there. So like I think when you watch how he moves on tape, he moves like he's smaller than that.
Yeah.
He moves so smooth and so quick, and to me, he's like if he could block a little better and he was a little bigger, he's what
Yeah.
Jaheim Bell wants to be. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right. Yeah.
Like that's what he is. He's that mismatch kind of player, and like you said, he's that guy who you could funnel offense through him. He could definitively be like, I'm not saying he's going to be this player at the NFL level, but he could definitively be like the Travis Kelsey on an offense where he's option one.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So uh, I really like his game because I think he is like number one, like Brock Bowers, similar to Theo. Like he's got that well-roundedness about his game, and I could see him being very valuable to any team, like regardless of offense. But yeah, no, I agree with you. Where it's like, sure, testing numbers may not be there, but what you see on tape is a pretty electric football player for the position, and I think just a
Yeah.
natural receiver who also like really gives a great effort as a blocker as well.
He definitely tries. I think the problem
Yeah.
is just, again, it's just not something he's ever gonna be great at. It
Mm,
doesn't feel like he has that type of frame to handle guys, but
mm,
he's gonna give you effort. I think he's good enough in that part of the game where he can be a tight end, right? Not
mm.
just be labeled a big receiver. But
Yeah.
again, like, I don't really care. Like, if you're taking a receiver or tight end high, it cannot be because, oh, he's a great blocker. Like, it has to be this guy could catch 60, 70, 80 balls a year and give
Yep.
me close to a like 8, 900, 1,000 yards and a couple touchdowns and be an impact. Like, he has to be
Mhm.
somebody that draws coverage away from people, like that type of player to be taken even as high as he's probably going to go, which is second round. It probably needs to be a guy like that. Like,
Yeah.
that's just what it comes down to. And that's part of why, not saying I think this guy isn't going to be great, but like, and kind of going backwards in time, I didn't love Mayer coming out of Notre Dame. Like, I didn't think he was special enough as a player with the ball in
Mhm.
his hands or getting the ball to him where I would take him high in the second round. Right. And even though I didn't necessarily think Laporta was going to be like this insane player that he became with the Lions rookie year, I did kind of like that they took him over him at the time because I'm like, I just think he's a better athlete and a better receiver. Like, just kind of what it comes down to. And that
Yeah.
doesn't mean Mayer's not going to be good, obviously. And that doesn't mean that tight ends who aren't special athletes or great pure receivers don't have a place. But there's a reason why Sanders is kind of consensus tight end too for most people, because he has that ability, like we talked about, to actually be the second option, preferably, but maybe even a number one on an offense that might need it at any time. So, yeah, like he's a great player. So, but let's talk about Brock Bowers a little bit, Felix. Not that he hasn't been talked about to death at this point, I'm sure, over the course of the draft cycle. But I'm just going to ask you this question about him first, because obviously he's our number one for sure. Of the things about him that we kind of know with him and that stand out to you, like what thing stands out to you most? Because I have an answer for this, and I'm curious what you think, like if it's different from yours. But what's the thing that stands out most about him to you?
Ooh, what stands out the most? Damn, that's a great question.
Yeah. I mean, with a guy like this, we can't just be like, this is what we like about him. It's like, yeah, no crap. He's, whatever. Like, we know.
Yeah,
Like, what do you think is the thing? Like, I know my answer right away, so I'm curious if it's different from yours, but
it's probably going to be different because I feel like you got this like particular thing in mind and you're like, I'm ready to say it.
We'll see.
So he's, it's hard because he's one of those, like, one of those elite prospects, and there's a lot to like about him. Man, if I had to pick something, I was ready for this one. If I had to pick something, I think what I'm impressed by is man, damn. I mean, he's got good hands.
Gotcha.
He's a tough player. I mean,
I can give you mine first if you want to take a second to think about it.
Yeah, go. What was yours? What was yours?
His fluidity in his hips, his ability to turn and run, his ability to catch the ball and get upfield as a tight end.
Yeah,
Kelce-esque it is. I know people don't want to compare him to Kelce because Kelce's a little bit bigger, obviously, and like it's a really tough ask to compare him to Kelce. But the thing with Kelce that makes him such a threat, or made him such a threat as a receiver, he's not necessarily like the fastest tight end or anything like that. He's not the biggest bruiser or whatever. When he catches the football, he goes from a receiver to a runner immediately. Like there's no separation of those two things. Like he goes from the ball got in my hands to I'm going upfield immediately. And he does a lot of the same stuff. Like his ability to flip his hips upfield and get going with the speed that he has, it just makes it so hard for linebackers and safeties to cover him, because let's say you're there with him. The second he catches the ball, now he's gone. Like if you aren't already on top of him, he's going to break away from you, because with a guy with his speed as a tight end, if he catches the ball in front of you, like, yeah, you might be able to wrangle him or whatever. But if you're trailing him and he catches the ball, you're not the guy tackling him anymore. You're not. Like it's one of your friends has to go get him now, because you're not catching him after that point. And that as a tight end is just so frustrating. I imagine as a defensive coordinator, like if I'm going up against a team and I know, okay, they have a tight end that once the ball is in his hands, he's about as good of a runner as anyone else on the field is going to be. That's annoying as shit, because now I have to ask my linebackers, like, hey, if he beats you on his route, you pretty much have to go into just trail mode and try to get an angle on him, because you're not going to be able to catch him at that point. Like that's just really frustrating for teams to deal with defensively. And with the amount of space that's created in the NFL nowadays, if he goes to a team that can create that space for him, and that you can't just target him with three guys and try to keep him from catching the ball, it's going to be really explosive, even early. We know tight ends struggle to produce typically early. Obviously Pitts had his 1,000 yards as a rookie, which was, he's just a different type of player entirely. And then Laporta this year was super productive, all that stuff. But this is a guy like in the right offense could produce about as much as any other tight end in the league, possibly as a rookie.
Yeah. No, I think, well, first of all, I want to say that particular trait that you singled out is like, and like the comparison to Kelce, I understand, like, I'm not a big comp guy per se.
I don't like to do depend unless it's like so stark.
Yeah.
Okay, I have to say this.
Exactly.
That's not the case. I think, but yeah.
Yeah, but I think in terms of like the example that you're using with Kelce, it's like so definitive. That is exactly the type of player that he has shown on tape at the collegiate level.
He could be
is like he's immediately just like up the field, immediately like taking up yards and just eating up yards and distancing himself. And it's funny because you were saying that, and like one of the things that kind of stuck out to me, and it's a trait in terms of like him as a receiver and being lined up out in slot and stuff like that. I was impressed by, and it kind of leads to, I guess, what you're talking about in a way, sometimes, but his ability to his tendency to like play blind spots really well. Anytime
Yes.
he's like really like manned up on somebody, he's really good at quickly and decisively like identifying, does he want to go like right or left? When is he going to
He's very good
sink?
at finding his leverage against the corners and
Ex-
safeties. Like
exactly.
he
He's
can.
very great at doing that. And it's like it could be a safety, a corner, a linebacker. He's just great at positioning himself where the ball is a clear like trajectory to him in his hands. And there's not really a lot of like contested catch like on his tape that I've
No,
seen because
he
he's so like,
he was open a lot.
yeah, he's so
He
open.
with contested catches are good, but there wasn't a lot of them. Yeah.
It's not, yeah. And it's like anytime that he, is really close to a defender, he's doing really well to position himself to like box him out a lot, And I just was like, this is like the most basketball player shit I keep seeing every time. Like,
Yeah.
he's got someone who's actually on him, they have like no shot because he's bodying them out and he extends and catches away from his body. So yeah, similar to what you said, he's just really good at anticipating like what a defender's going to do, getting the ball in his hands, but then like immediately sort of just having this like sense of space around him to know where is he going to cut up field, how is he going to cut up field, is he going to dip his shoulder to take contact, or is he going to turn and like make a guy like miss, or try to make a guy miss with the first move. Like he's very reactionary at like really really immediate, like just immediately after catching the ball. It's impressive.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of debate about how early should he go? Like how early can you take him?
Yeah,
And
that was actually, not to cut you off, that was going to ask you that question, was
yes.
like, where do you view it? Because one of the things that I think I saw somebody, I'm forgetting who pointed it out. Forgive me for that, but someone had pointed out, he's a tight end, and if you're going to be selecting him high, his cap hit's already going to be like top 5 in the league.
Yes.
So,
So
you know,
that's the thing about that. So like that's part of the conversation too that people are having is like, well, if you look, it's like, here's my ultimate thing with him.
mm,
Do you think that he could be the number one or at worst number two option in your passing game? If the answer to that question is yes, then you can take him as high as you want. I don't really care where you take him. Now, in a class that has the pass catchers that we have, I do think he should be the fourth pass catcher. Like, I think that because obviously we're looking at receivers, we're not going to talk about receivers yet because that's going to be next episode actually. But if you're taking a receiver, obviously like the Harrison Jr., Neighbors, the Doomsdays of the world, they're kind of the consensus top three guys, obviously, right? After those three go, and maybe even before an Adunze or a Neighbors, whoever you prefer it to, right? After them, I think you can take Bowers. Like he should be the next pass catcher off the board, across the board. And I would listen to an argument for higher than that, but I definitely think after those three, at least based on the
mhm,
consensus board, like he should be the next pass catcher. Maybe that means he's the ninth pick or something like that, which the Bears don't need a tight end. But again, he's not really a true tight end anyway. Or you look at a team like the Colts is a very popular spot right now because he could fall that far with the way the class is, right? Because the
yeah,
tackles are so good, the receivers are so good, corners are so good. He could fall even farther a little bit. Now, I hope he doesn't fall to 18 because I feel like the Bengals would turn the card in and then I would hate myself for the next 10 years. But that's beside the point. The question of where he should go is really interesting because it's not about the position he plays, in my opinion. When you're this type of athlete and this type of receiver and receiving,
mhm,
I don't care what the position you're listed at is anymore. Like this is the conversation turns into like how
yeah,
much of the offense is going to run through you. And with Bowers,
yep,
it could be the most of the offense, right? Like
yeah,
depending on where he goes. So it's fun to talk about. I do think it is going to make him slip farther than he should based on just his talent level.
mhm,
But we'll find out, obviously, at the draft. I think it's gonna we'll know more by the end of it, like near when we get closer to the end, like where teams fall on him. But He's just a special athlete, man, and it's tough to not take a player like that high, even if it's maybe not technically the best use of your assets. When, listen, I don't care. Like, I'll
Yeah,
take him. I have
he's a
Pat
weapon.
Freiermuth, Darnell
He's a weapon.
Washington, and whoever else. Like, I'll take him on my team tomorrow. I don't care. He can play slot receiver, damn snap, whatever. I don't care. Like,
Yep.
you could just tell him, like, hey, you're gonna play literally 90% of the time in the slot, and then he'd be like, all right, cool. I already do 60%. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, he doesn't even have to play tight end realistically. Like, at least not in the traditional sense if you don't want him to. But the other thing is, we didn't really
Yeah.
talk about it. He's a really good blocker for his size,
Yes.
especially. Like, it's not perfect. It's not going to be perfect. He's 6'4", probably sub 240 when he's playing. Let's be honest about it.
Yeah.
But he tries really hard. He has very good technique. I think as a run blocker on the move, especially, he can uproot guys that are like a little bit his size or smaller. You get him on linebackers and safeties down the field. Like, he will do it, and he's capable of it more so than like even Sanders, who's probably a little bigger than him overall. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's just there's not much you can say about him that's like, man, I think he's gonna not work out. Like, I'd be shocked if he isn't a top 5 tight end for a very long time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
No, I agree. I agree.
and that's pretty much like with the tight ends, especially like that you can't ask for much more. If you're drafting a tight end early, it's got to be a guy who you think can be a top 5 tight end for a decade, and I think he fits that billing so far from what I've seen. So,
Oh,
but
absolutely. Yeah.
so next week, guys, that's going to do it for us this week. Next week, we are doing receivers. I personally am terrified because I have no idea who the hell is going to be. Like, I kind of know who my top 3 are based on everything I've seen. Past that, it could be literally 12 people. I don't
Yeah.
know. So it's going to be fun to see where we all land. I hope that we have a lot of different guys on our list for next week.
Yeah.
But because then we get to talk about all of them because there's a ton of guys to talk about. But we'll be doing our top 10 receivers, and I imagine we'll be spending enough time on those guys by themselves to probably not do anything beyond that. But maybe you'll get a mock draft in sometime during next week. We'll talk about it, probably after the show. But either way, I'll do it for us this week. Thanks for joining me, Felix. I know it was kind of an impromptu thing we had to figure out because of some stuff going on, but glad to
Yeah.
have you on tonight. Again, we'll see you
Of
guys on
course.
Sunday. Be on the lookout, and we'll see you then.